So, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, Fee was talking about before when we started the whole channel, we would bring along a lot of candidates and whatnot, talk about their policies and what they were wishing for and whatnot. And we don't do that anymore. We don't have candidates on. We have instead analysts on, commentators on, journalists on to talk about those issues that are very, very nuanced that need to be talked about. Now, if you haven't caught Whitney Webb's Off Guardian panel interview with one of our guests here today, Tom Luongo, if you can bring him on in, you don't know what you're missing. It is just amazing. It really is one of those. I watched over the weekend, last weekend. I watched, and a couple of days into the week, I watched What's in the Water, and then I watched this panel. I got to tell you, this panel kicked What's in the Water's ass. And we have one of the guys on from the panel. His name is Tom Luongo. He's a commentator. And you can go to, what is it, tom.co for all your
it's tomluongo.me.
Yeah. Quick question, Tom. Are you related to Roberto Luongo, the goaltender in hockey?
But I wish I was. No, not at all. I am a hockey fan, huge hockey fan. I used to be, but not anymore. So I remember when he was drafted. I remember the deal that happened at the draft that day for him. It was crazy. I'm like, so it was very cool. But no,
who was your hockey team before you left?
I'm a Sabres fan. I used to run a Sabres blog, as a matter of fact. And
get out of here.
No, yeah, seriously. I used to run the biggest Buffalo Sabres blog on the internet back in like 2005 through 2008. I used to write for AOL Fan House. We all got the first generation of hockey bloggers coming out of the lockout. Myself, Eric McErlane, James Myrtle, and a few others. We all got picked up by AOL. And, we all thought it was cool that we were getting paid $8 a post to write for AOL because, getting paid the blog was kind of cool. And then just realized that this is not a long-term, career choice. So it just kind of petered out over time.
Well, we'll talk about hockey another time because fans get really mad at me if I start diving into stuff and, don't get into the topic because, we talked the other day and like Fam and I, Fiorella, was very excited to have you on because of your perspective. And I'm just going to set the table for you because I only have like 5 questions written down, but I think the first question is going to take some time to unpack. There'll be a little pushback on it, whatnot. I'm going to play devil's advocate because personally...
Wait, Pasta. Yeah. I just want to say something before you ask him this question. So our friend Gloria, she's a journalist. She loved your takes on the panel. And she was talking about how, you need to hear what he said. And I heard the panel. And some people were like, "Oh, he's being a little rude there. He's being a little attacking." And I was like, "I didn't see that. I thought he was just, saying the truth." I tend to agree with your perspective. Pasta's a little bit more suspect. So go ahead and Pasta. Go ahead and start that.
And I felt the same way too, Fam. I don't feel he was attacking. He's a sports guy. He was giving no guff, just like little slap shots right off the edge. And I want to talk about it because he also used the term, said, I have the economic hammer. And that's why I want to kind of slow that conversation when we get into that. As Fee just said, she's a little bit more with your perspective. When you look at the nuance of the Great Reset, I often say, I don't know if this is theater being played out in front of us and Putin is part of the World Economic Forum and he's doing exactly what is planned. And it's this kind of overall plot to get us to buy into and to eventually allow ourselves to be genetically disabled through vaccines and whatnot and everything, and to have control and social credit scores. And then there's an argument, and as a Tulsi supporter, we now hear this from a lot of Tulsi people, that people like Vladimir Putin have been disenfranchised from the World Economic Forum. You yourself have kind of felt like the World Economic Forum, you said, hates him. And he's saying, you know what? I ain't playing anymore. I'm going to do my own thing. Instead of your new world order, we're going to kind of propose a fair world order or a different type of world order. So can you give us your 3-minute pitch? Your position is that you believe Putin is no longer liked by the World Economic Forum. And you kind of cite that one speech that Putin had. Can you give us your 3 to 5 minute pitch on why you think Putin is not part of the World Economic Forum and is no longer in line with Klaus Schwab?
Oh, it's really quite easy. If Putin was interested in the fourth industrial revolution, as they define it. If he was interested in climate change, if he was interested in any of these things, he would have dismantled Gazprom. He would have dismantled Rosatom. He would have dismantled the Russian state nuclear power, the nuclear SOE. He would have done so many things. He would have knuckled under ultimately to all of the things that they've told us that we need to do. When he walked into virtual Davos in 2020 and had to sit down with Klaus Schwab and was asked directly about these things, if you read the transcript of that speech, or you just watch Putin's body language while watching it, you'll see that he just thinks it's dumb. And he thinks it's anathema to human progress. Like, I'm not saying that Putin is perfect in any way, but it's very, very clear. And the same thing goes with Tulsi Gabbard. Like, there's this meme out there that if you want to, then you have to remember two things. One, you know a person in politics by who their enemies are. So, like, well, that's not tough, right? So everybody hated Donald Trump. You might want to think about listening to what he had to say. Doesn't matter left, right. I mean, libertarians like myself have real serious issues with Donald Trump. Okay. Same thing with Putin. Does anybody like Putin? Do you really think that these people are that clever that they're going to run this kind of double secret probation, triple agent kind of thing going on? No, obviously not. Putin's a very simple person. He's an ex intelligence officer who took over a country that was at the nadir of its history. He kicked out and all the oligarchs that were in the pay of British intelligence and the New York banks and all the rest of it. You look into the story of Bill Browder and how he's lied to the world about almost everything. He kicked all those people out, nationalized Yukos, kicked out Khodorkovsky, and then they've hated him ever since. Now, when Putin was associated with the WEF, which is now the boogeyman, it was 20 years ago? Like, back then, the World Economic Forum was mostly just a European Eurotrash fart sniffing, group. And if you're trying to build legitimacy, you would want to have a guy like Vladimir Putin on your list of people. Just because people show up to a meeting doesn't mean that they're part of the group. And especially Putin being an ex-intelligence officer, if you want to know who your enemies are, you got to talk to them. And if you look at Russian diplomacy very carefully, which I've been studying the Russians for going on 11 years now, it's very clear that they're happy to talk to everybody. They're happy to listen to what everybody has to say, because the only way they're going to find out what it is that they're going to have to do to respond to these people is to talk to them and hear what their perspective is. So Putin launches this campaign in Ukraine, which takes everybody off guard, including all of his supporters. Myself, like everybody was like, this was not in the cards. And I didn't go into much of this during the debate that we had with Whitney Webb and Off Guardian, because it's a very big topic. I could spend a half an hour trying to just lay all this stuff out, because going into this, I really did feel like there was a real game of realpolitik being played, where ultimately Europe is wanting an independent foreign policy from the United States and the West, from the United States and the UK, and Putin was their means to get that, right? By playing, by driving up the threat of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, which was not real, and then allowing Europe to basically eventually step back from the crazy that we're seeing from the US and the UK. That is not what took place. What took place was Europe doing what Europe always does, which is to play the victim while they're enabling the terrible policy. And they're just as deeply involved in this as anybody else, as the US and the UK. But there's been this thing since Biden's taken office that is very clear that legitimacy of the US as on the world stage has been part of the agenda. Doesn't matter if we're talking about fiscal policy, or we're talking about domestic policy, or we're talking about foreign policy. All of these foreign policy mistakes that we've seen from people like Blinken and Newland and everybody. Those aren't mistakes. Those are all planned events to delegitimize the United States in the eyes of the world. And so that when the war would break out in Ukraine, if it was going to break out in Ukraine, it could all be blamed on the United States, which is what Europe's trying to do now. But they clearly have every intention of going along with this because their agenda is to crash the world economy and to rid the world of the use of fossil fuels, because they firmly believe that the only way to go forward is to depopulate the world by 50 to 70%. Davos rhymes with Thanos, guys, like the Marvel movies. I'm not kidding when I say that it's that kind of evil. And it's really very obvious to me that these people are just Malthusians that believe in a kind of linear projection of our damage to the planet based on the number of people that there are. And we can't support more than 1 or 2 billion people. So we've got to get rid of all these useless humans. Putin does not believe that. He has put so many things in place to try and booster and bolster the Russian demographic situation and everything else that it's anathema. If you study Russian domestic policy at all, you'd be like, oh, that's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard. So that's part of it. That's part of the pitch. I can go on for another half an hour, but I think you'd probably get bored of listening to me filibuster. So.
No, I mean, honestly, it makes a lot of sense to me in terms of geopolitically, and also the fact that, if you're talking about a game of chess, Russia has been extremely careful with their moves, whereas the U.S. comes in attacking early, and they put out, it's very obvious what their moves are. And, when in terms of the conflict in Ukraine, though, with Russia, what does it mean now when Russia is clearly, I mean, they took over control of Mariupol. They're obviously winning this war. If you look at anything but Western media, they're obviously winning this conflict. I mean, a lot of people called it Putin invading Ukraine. For me, it was more like a military operation that then turned into something more. But now Russia is saying they want control of the southern region of Ukraine. Where does this put Russia, and how will this play out, considering the fact that the ruble has recovered, the dollar is losing its value? We're seeing massive inflation here in the United States. We saw high prices at the pump. We're seeing a massive bubble, a massive real estate bubble that's also about to pop, and the market about to crash. Where does this all play in terms of Russia versus the US and the power structure there? Sure.
Great question. Lot to unpack. Okay, there's about 5 different ways I can go into this. So let's try and start with the beginning. Let's go into Ukraine. From the beginning of this, I think on the day after the invasion started, and I do call it an invasion, by the way, they invaded sovereign territory of Ukraine. I don't consider the Donbass or Crimea Ukraine because they all declared independence ages ago. But the rest of Ukraine, the Russians invaded a sovereign nation. It's not a hard way to. That's not the wrong way to look at it from an international law perspective or just a common sense perspective. But I published an article right after, like on the day after or 2 days after the thing started. I also published on my Twitter feed a map of Ukraine that I said, keep this in mind. This is what it's going to look like when we're all said and done. And it's basically what is classically Novorossiya, going from Kharkov in the north all the way around to Odessa in the west. And the whole southern half of Ukraine would become either an independent state like Belarus, part of the Union state with Russia, but still nominally an independent state, or just become part of the Russian Federation itself. Now, that was always the goal. Kiev was never the goal. Now, at the same time, they launched a basically 4-pronged assault with the hope of getting a decapitation strike on Ukraine, which failed miserably, by the way. And I don't care what anybody says. I'll go toe to toe with Scott Ritter on this one and say, look, they failed. It's not hard to say that they failed in Kiev to take it. They didn't take it. Did they distract a lot of the Ukrainian army in doing so? Absolutely. Was that their primary goal? Probably. Was the stretch goal a decapitation strike against Kiev in order to end the conflict? Sure. Did they succeed? No. Had they succeeded, this war would be over because Ukraine would have had to then come to the bargaining table. Okay. And then we would have already been talking about, the terms of their surrender, which at that point, which I think was the Russians' goal, which was then to unload onto the world in a public forum like the UN or, an after war tribunal to explain this is why we did this. And then all of their information and all of their evidence about Western malfeasance and NATO's malfeasance in Ukraine could come to light, be it biolabs or this or whatever it is. That was their goal. That was their big stretch goal. Had they achieved that, we'd be there. And I do firmly believe that we've been running the operation in Ukraine. We've been running Ukraine's defense, mostly probably out of the Azovstal steel factory in Mariupol. Okay. Because there are a whole lot of people that shouldn't be there that are trapped in there. And they're right now, the doors are getting, welded shut and they can starve to death as far as the Russians are concerned. I think of it this way. Do we ever want to go when you catch one of these people, be it Hillary Clinton or JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or whomever, do they ever go to discovery in a lawsuit? No, they never go for discovery. They always settle out of court first. They always do something to avoid the presentation of evidence in an official capacity.
Yeah.
That's what's going on in Ukraine now. That's why the United States is telling Zelensky not to surrender, even though the Ukrainian army is getting carved up, even though civilians are dying, even though all of these things, which are terrible and we should not be discussing anymore. The thousands of people that are going to be killed have been killed and will be killed because war is disgusting under all circumstances. But because they don't want to go for discovery, because they do not want to want anybody to know what the truth is, we're going to sit here and we're going to grind this thing out to the last Ukrainian. Yeah. Now, are the Russians playing as much of the PSYOP game as the United States is? Of course they are. Are they as good at it as the US and Europe? No, not even close. And so, but I will say that I think that there's a certain amount of success that they have been able to generate in order within the dissident West, people like myself who really do want to believe that the Russians have been more successful than they actually have. The truth of the matter is that Russian military doctrine is just simply different than U.S. military doctrine. They're willing to throw men and materiel at a problem. Like this isn't like we can't look back through history and see the Russians throwing millions of people at a problem. Like they're not necessarily particularly good at this kind of combined operation. So it is what it is. And I know some people have used this as some kind of idea that maybe this could be the reason why Putin is actually working for the WEF. Nonsense. It's just old Russian military doctrine. Now, when you look at that and you take that and you start to back out and you start to think about what could Russia's grander strategy be, well, it's in my mind, it's always been a war of attrition. I've studied Putin for a long time. I've watched how he conducts operations against the West. He makes a big initial move, be it Syria or Georgia or South Ossetia, and then forces a response. We, of course, always move in and say, okay, we're going to lengthen this thing out and try and turn it into a war of attrition against the Russians. And the Russians turned it into a war of attrition against us. Because now we're dealing with the reality of the situation, which is that the Russians are a major exporter of almost nearly every strategic commodity there is on this planet. And they have said very simply, got gold or rubles? No? Okay, cool. You can't have any. It's that simple. And it was the move that myself and Lou Groman and many other financial analysts looked at this and said, this is all they have to do. And so what the Russians are doing now is they're not just undermining the World Economic Forum. Okay. They are literally beginning a new monetary architecture. Zoltan Pozar of Credit Suisse came out about 3 weeks ago, a very famous article, at least within my space, my corner of the internet, called Bretton Woods 3, where he described a new commodity-based global monetary system. Okay. Where Bretton Woods was the one that was put in place after World War II. Bretton Woods 2 is what we've been living under, the kind of dollar reserve standard. And then today we're moving forward into a commodity-backed system. And by tying the ruble to gold and therefore Russian oil through the ruble to gold and Russian gas and Russian aluminum and titanium and everything else, what Putin is doing is putting maximal financial pressure on a hyper-financialized system that is built on the back of rehypothecated paper, gold, and commodities. In a hyper financialized system like we have today, where paper is the price setter and the commodity producer is the price taker, right? That's who has the power in the system. So the commodity producers for the last 75 years have not had pricing power. They've been at the mercy of whatever it is the guys trading futures contracts and speculating on futures contracts and at the LBMA or the COMEX or ICE or wherever. They're the ones that have all the pricing power. So the commodity producers are on a kind of drip feed, making 1%, 2% a year at best, and having to just grind out a subsistence lifestyle. If you can then, corrupt their government and get them to buy a whole bunch of loans from the IMF and the World Bank in order to rebuild after a currency crisis, CF Argentina or Venezuela or most of Africa, and you can see what this millstone looks like. The Russians have always said no to this. Okay, certainly the Russians under Putin have always said no to this. And so now Putin has now flipped the tables. And he's chosen this moment in time when the financial system is at its most vulnerable. It's at its most over-leveraged post-COVID. It's at its most overextended and needs a greater injection of liquidity in order to keep asset prices where they are. He's like, no, we're going to collapse it. We're either going to force one of two things to happen. Either the price of physical gold is going to rise to offset the paper that you printed, or we're going to collapse the paper gold market. I'm trying not to give everybody the finger, or we're going to collapse the paper gold price, and we're going to collapse that system, and asset prices have to fall by 90%. Either way, asset prices have to fall relative to commodities by anywhere from 75 to 90%. That puts him in a very, very powerful position, especially with the Chinese backing him up. Okay, because the Chinese, remember, have a physically settled gold futures market over in Shanghai. They have an oil futures contract that trades medium sour crude. Okay, which is the only futures contract that trades medium sour crude in the entire world. Everybody else trades light sweet, Brent, WTI, Dubai, and that contract can then be, the proceeds from that can be then filtered onto the Shanghai exchange and converted to physical gold. So there's no reason why the plumbing is already there to create this financialized version, this new financialized version of the world based on physical commodities controlled by the Russians and the Chinese.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're headed. And what happens in Ukraine at this point is almost an afterthought. The Russians are going to take everything to Odessa. Kharkov, I think, is up in the air because, we'll see what happens. But everything else, like we already have Donetsk and Lugansk are ready to have a referendum to join the Russian Federation. Zaporizhia has already stated that they want to hold the same referendum. We're going to see the same thing coming out of Kherson and then Mykolaiv and then eventually Odessa, which is the strongest ethnic Russian, part of the entire country other than Crimea, who's already part of the Russian Federation. So once that happens, this whole northern coast, which I said last year when this was going on, I wrote an entire article for my newsletter in February of last year when they were ginning this thing up. I said, look, at the end of the day, this thing is going to turn around. If they piss Putin off enough, he's just going to turn around and invade and take the entire southern coast of Ukraine and turn the Black Sea into a Russian lake.
Yeah.
That's where we are today.
So you've given us Putin's stated objective, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's motivating him? Is it for humanity? Is it for different power with other oligarchs? What is motivating his stated objective? Before I even give any of the pushbacks of some of the, I have some pushbacks still.
Sure, that's fine.
And we'll talk about that. But let me try to understand what you think is motivating Vladimir Putin.
It's easy.
Yeah.
Russia. Putin's a Russian nationalist. Yeah. He's a Russian nationalist. He sees this in terms of this is an existential threat against Russia. He understands the history of Russia and the West's interference into Russia, going all the way back to the British Empire, mind you, that this has been an issue. A recent speech by Putin at either this year's Valdai discussion forum or this year's State of the Union address stated quite explicitly, like, Communism is a Western idea you people like gave to us and nearly destroyed us with. Like, it's a Western idea created by a German philosopher and implemented by Brits. Like, this is the reality. And you did this and you exported this to us at a time when we were weak culturally, of our own devices, mind you. And, a century ago. And then we lived through it. But Russia itself as a concept survived even communism. And so Putin is very skilled at tugging on those nationalist ideas and believes very strongly in the idea that the Russian state is supreme as conceptualized as by the will of the people. They are not a democracy. He's made this abundantly clear. He's like, look, democracy to us is like less than 20 years old. We don't really know how to deal with it. So we're going to devolve power out of the effectively the unitary czar or the president, and at the pace of whatever the Russian people want. But he devolved power out of the presidency a year and a half ago. He did it for a variety of defensive reasons, because the Russian economy, the Russian constitution was way too strong that put too much power in the hands of the president, that if the president could be undermined or a puppet could be put in place, then all the work that he's done to stabilize Russia could be undone in a heartbeat with one term versus with a bad president. That's how much power that person wields. Okay. So it's truly just about that. That's in my mind. Okay. And he does believe that the former Soviet stands are a Russian sphere of influence. He's not interested in the Warsaw Pact countries at all. He's not interested in Poland. He's really not even interested in the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. He's certainly not interested in Bulgaria or Romania or Hungary or anything. Ukraine is traditionally the way you destabilize Russia. Mm-hmm. Right? Oh. And that Ukraine cannot fall into Western hands. It either has to be left as a buffer state or he's going to take it over.
Pam, did you have any questions, or did you want me to just keep going?
Well, I wanted to go into how China is playing into this. But did you have something else before that?
I can do my pushback after this question. Okay. This interview is happening exactly like I saw it. So go ahead. Cool.
Okay. So China, obviously you talked about them being involved now. I believe that was one of the reasons why Putin acted now instead of later. One of the criticisms that the people had of him were, why didn't he act sooner? Mm-hmm. So we know China is a major player, obviously, as I would say a superpower. But what's happening in Shanghai right now? How does that play into the economic plans, considering the fact that many people are blaming, of course, as predicted, right? The economic fallouts happening worldwide, not just with Russia and Ukraine, but of course with the Shanghai lockdown and all of that's happening.
I think there's two angles to think about with the Shanghai lockdown. One, the Chinese made a big deal about how they beat COVID by instituting draconian lockdowns, right? And they have a real problem now about saving face, because now they don't have any real immunity. They don't have any herd immunity, and they don't have any vaccine immunity because the vaccines don't provide any immunity. And so now they've got a problem with potentially saving face. That's one angle. I think it's a minor angle. I think it's part of why they're doing it. The other thing is, I'll be quite honest with you. You shut down a significant amount of the Chinese economy at this moment in time. It's China's way of saying, look, we're at war with you as well. We're just not declaring war. So you want to declare war on our strategic partner, Russia? That's great. We'll make sure that if the Russians aren't going to be able to have the things they need to keep their economy running and their quote unquote war machine running, fine. Neither will you. We're going to find out real soon now just how secure U.S. defense supply chains actually are from a Chinese embargo. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not speculating that I know. I'm saying that I'm making the inference that we're going to find out if they're as secure as we think they are or not. Because if, look, it's one thing to make sure that you don't export the technology for 3D CNC machines and all the single crystal metallurgy and all the stuff that we have. It's another thing to outsource all the rubber bushings and the grommets and all the basic stuff that we don't produce anymore, and that we can't even like spin up in 6 months to build the things that we would need to build in order to continue supplying Ukraine and or fight a long-term war. So it's a very interesting question in terms of supply chains. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that we're in a vulnerable position. I'm saying we're going to find out if we are.
But in terms then of Xi Jinping's appearance at the World Economic Forum, I read your article. You mentioned that he wasn't really full on agreeing with it. You mentioned that aspect of it. But in terms of China as a surveillance state, as having a social credit score, as having embraced this technocratic age and embraced the reliance on AI and robots, how does that play into the China also is working for itself or for the Chinese people, or versus China also in line with the Great Reset?
I don't think China's in line with the Great Reset, but I'm certainly willing to entertain the idea that they're going to help us, like push us into a place that they would like us to go. Like China's not, I hate to call them a malign actor. I just think they're working on in their own self-interest. And China's a net energy importer. Never forget that. And they're a net commodity importer, massive net commodity importer. They have their own vulnerabilities relative to the size of their population. So, the CCP is paranoid. I think their rule over China is brittle and metastable. Okay. And so that just their embracing of technology in a technocratic, surveillance state doesn't surprise me at all. We're talking about the Chinese Communist Party after all, and technocracy. Like the Alexander Mercouris at the Duran, I remember having a conversation with him about this a while ago. And he said, look, Tom, what was the ultimate technocratic state of the 20th century? It was the Soviet Union. Like communist states tend towards a kind of technocratic outlook on economic planning. They use outmoded, weird, linearly produced data, linearly extrapolated data, and create and construct 5-year plans from them and then operate them, whether they're efficient or not. They don't believe in the free market. They don't believe in a chaotic dynamic system where prices respond to input pressures and all the rest of it. They don't believe in that. So China is just kind of moving down the path. They're kind of a more advanced version of what the World Economic Forum wants to impose on the West. That doesn't mean that they're in cahoots with them to impose that over here. It means that that's just who they are. And their society is different than ours. So the Chinese and Russian attitude towards state and the people and their relationship to this is just different. I did a podcast with Matt Arrett after we did that. After we did that thing with Whitney Webb, where he and I went over some of the stuff. I also did a show with Joaquin Flores of Fort Russ, previously Fort Russ and other, and he's got a great take on this. I did like 3 or 4 of them right in a row. Alistair Crook, Joaquin Flores, and Matt Arrett, to try and explain to the West the differences in the way civilizations like Iran, China, and Russia view their relationship to the state and the West. We have a very transactional view of our government, right? And it's why we honestly believe that our system is run by the oligarchs who are bigger than the state, right? We are all worried about, corporatocracy and transnational corporations running everything and all of this stuff, because we see things from a very transactional point of view. Well, we've got all this money. I can bribe that guy and make that guy do what I want. And our governmental systems are designed to allow people to be corrupted and then wield the levers of power via that corruption. And so the person who stands behind the president is the guy who actually wields all the power. The president actually doesn't have any real power, or your congressman or your city commissioner or whomever, right? Regulatory capture is real and it's endemic all throughout the West. I don't really see that same dominant philosophy in these older civilizations. They believe in Iran, Russia, China as a thing. It is the mythology that they can change systems whenever they need to in order to implement what they think is going to be the best solution for the current situation. So if it's a czar in the 19th century, fine. If it's communism in the early 20th century, fine. If it's third way kind of, half-assed capitalism today, fine. This is why we can move from Maoism to Dengism to Xiism in 70 years in China. There are three radically different economic systems, but the Chinese state itself is still the same. And the people put up with it as long as the state doesn't predate them too terribly. And it's just a different mindset that we have. And, it is what it is. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying it is what it is. We should understand that before we sit down to try and analyze military doctrine, foreign policy, trade policy, yada, yada, yada.
I think also China has a higher floor than the United States. You know what I'm saying? Like they found a way to take a lot of people and move them out of poverty and raise the floor. Whereas if, United States has gone the opposite direction and now we got close to 750,000 people homeless on the street. And I think that also kind of plays into the fact of how you'll deal with your government a lot more, give them a lot of space.
And I do have to say,
if you think about it, Craig, just to say real quick, our oligarchs are in charge and they've extracted all the wealth. The central bank model has extracted all the wealth. It's what enables the corporatocracy. And remember, guys, I'm a hardcore libertarian.
Yeah.
So
I can tell.
when you push this thing to its limit. Now, at the end of the day, like doesn't matter. Like I have a massive sympathy for the progressive critique of Western capitalism. I just don't agree with how we should go about replacing it. That's where it's about implementation. It's not about stating what the problems as stated are really obvious. Like to me, I think everybody sees what the problems are. The question is, how do we solve those problems? And what systems are we going to move towards? And what do we have to go through to get there? I mean, I get pushback from libertarians all the time that I'm given aid and comfort to tyrants. I'm like, yeah, but like Ancapistan is like hundreds of years off, guys. Like I got to deal with this problem that's there in front of me right now. And that problem right now is that we're a world at war. Like it's crazy. I'm like, I could care less about where we're going in 150 or 200 years. Like I give a crap. Like, I got problems to solve today.
Ancapistan, fam, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that argument that we'll have that libertarian versus, whatever socialist argument another day because we would have run out of time. But I did want to say there is another perspective that the technology that's being embraced in China is coming from the West. Like the surveillance state, all of that is literally adopted from the West. And so it's just, to me, it just seems kind of like, well, what about that aspect? Perhaps billionaires, there are oligarchs there that have ties to big money, particularly in the West, that have ties to certain, especially in Shanghai, a more liberal oriented city. So to me, there could be, I think, a double play within the Chinese society. I don't think they're like, homogenous.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to simplify any of that, but I'll say this. What I mean by what you have to realize here is that Xi's made it abundantly clear that China has the classic tall poppy problem. Like, does everybody remember when Jack Ma went missing for like 6 months? Mm-hmm. Okay, like this has been going on since Hong Kong. Since the protests in Hong Kong over the extradition law, Xi has been going out and just taking down oligarchs left and right while further closing China's capital account and kicking out Western NGOs and Western money. George Soros is hopping mad because he's got billions of dollars trapped over in China that he can't get out. And from what I understand, it was an Evergrande. And like, if I'm Xi, I'm like, yeah, you ain't getting that back. And that's why he's the devil. That's why Xi's the devil. But again, the Chinese state is, again, brittle. It's fundamentally, I mean, look, everybody is dealing with this, the reality of a collapse of the Western financial system. And this repricing or this revaluation of assets in terms of commodities. And it's going to cause political pressure on everyone. It's going to cause a breakup of the United States here. It's going to cause the European Union to finally fail. It's going to cause China unbelievable amounts of internal problems. It's going to cause Russia problems. It's going to cause everybody problems. And if you don't think that people who have power aren't paranoid about losing that power, be it China, Davos, the New York boys over in the Southern District of New York, the New York banks, or, hell, like your average South American dictator, it doesn't matter. They're all worried about that, and they all react exactly the same way. They become more paranoid. They lock stuff down, and until at some point their regime collapses. And that's where we are today.
Quick question.
It comes in different flavors, but it's not all, just because it all kind of looks the same doesn't mean that they're all on board with the same program.
Just so we know where you're at, give me a South American dictator.
I say that, and the sad part about it is that I really regret saying it the minute I said it. To be honest with you, I actually don't have any. I actually don't even have anyone I can actually point to. I don't even have a problem with Maduro. I mean, he's an idiot. He's the bus driver, but he is what he is. And the Venezuelan people, for all intents and purposes, have chosen him because of the pressure that we put on. Him. They put the because of the pressure we put on them. I don't even care at this point. I mean, when you're dealing with this situation, when you're dealing with people who are going to lose power, they always become paranoid. It doesn't matter who they are.
Okay. So let me tie into one of my last questions, and if he has more, we can kind of finish it up. I know we're like 43 minutes past the hour. I'm going to push back because, and I want you to help me understand your point of view over here when you talk about Putin has made these moves because he's a nationalist, because he's for Russia. That to me tells me he cares about the people. He cares about Russians, people of his own country.
Sure.
And why then why the COVID tyranny in the country and stuff like that? Why not? We know from when it comes to COVID, there's other therapeutics and other things you can get into. I can't say what they are, but why the COVID tyranny? Why those avenues when it came to the forcing of the boop boop?
Sure.
And also, too, then tie that into why is also Russia on board with these central bank digital currencies? And, what I'm saying? They've given Bitcoin a little bit of a stiff arm. You have a Bitcoin thing in you.
They really haven't.
Yeah.
I don't think they have. They've legitimized it for the banking system in order to get around sanctions. What they've done is the Bitcoin regulation in Russia. Okay.
Not until the sanctions came upon. Before that, they were all them and G were giving the stiff arm to Bitcoin. So
now actually again, Craig, I don't think that the Bitcoin regulations, that the digital currency regulations that were put in place were meant to create a regulatory framework to legitimize and create legitimate Bitcoin businesses within the Russian system. Again, it's a different
currencies is what I'm saying. And
now central bank did now the Russians as far as now, are they pushing towards a potentially digital ruble? Yes, they are. Are the Russians potentially going to have more of a surveillance state than we in the West are comfortable with? Yes. Is that possible? Absolutely. Is it going to work? Who knows? Because this is the thing. We know that it's coming here in the West. We know that Europe is going to do it. We know that at a certain level, that people explore these things for two reasons. One, as a potential defensive mechanism against somebody else developing the same thing. That's one. And two, as to whether or not they can actually use it for real. Remember also that the Bank of Russia is still IMF controlled. Okay. Navalny is not, she's a very interesting, the head of the Bank of Russia is a very interesting figure. And I continue to have a hard time understanding why Putin keeps her around, except that she's actually does just enough to stay in power, but then also screws up just enough to justify if he ever wants to take over the central bank. I do believe at some point that they will nationalize the Central Bank of Russia and take it out from control of Western oligarchs. It is actually controlled and shares owned by foreign actors, just like almost every other central bank in the world. Why the COVID tyranny? Well, there's two things. One, Why the COVID tyranny under Donald Trump? Because he got bad information from the people around him. Because he trusted his advisors who gave him bad information.
Or he's part of the whole theater.
I don't buy that about Trump. Trump is not smart enough to.
He went out there and he's promoting the vaccine
because he didn't know any better. He's a dumb, and he's still doing it now because he's a freaking stupid germaphobe. Both
also a WEF Hall of Fame wrestler that understands how to work the idiocracy of the crowd and how to move people to one side of the party and become tribal as can be. When it's any serious decision, also said that Bitcoin was a scam because why? He's in bed and he's bending the knee to the central banks itself. He could be part of this whole thing as well, as far as I'm concerned.
He could be, but I mean, I'll be honest with you. I just don't see it. I see Trump as being easily manipulated by bad people around him because given almost no options for having good people around him. The American deep state is very, very, very powerful. No different than if Marine Le Pen wins this weekend, we're going to be saying the same thing about Marine Le Pen you're going to be saying the same thing about Marine Le Pen in a year because the French deep state is so freaking pervasive and so powerful that they'll just blame her for everything. Trump is and the other thing, and you'll be honest, if you look very carefully at what Trump's been doing, he's losing his base. He's going to run in 2024, and if he doesn't get himself straightened out, he won't have a base to run on because we're all pissed off with him and the vaccines. Yeah. Trump is a carnival barker. And to him, he still thinks that was a great achievement of his presidency. I'm serious. I just think that's who he is. That you can take it one step farther than that, but I just don't see that reasonable. As far as Putin is concerned and Sputnik 5, Sputnik 5 is based on technology that the same people used to develop, that the Russians used to develop an Ebola vaccine and a SARS vaccine, same technologies. Okay. So
also, on that issue though, now you're looking at the labs. I don't know if you've talked about this, Tom. Like the bio labs to me thing throws off the fact that that Putin is working on behalf of the big pharmaceuticals, because there are things there that clearly the United States did not want to get out.
Yes.
And so that aspect to me throws a wrench in that argument.
That's one way of looking at it. From the moment that Sputnik 5 came out, when it was announced, I looked at it and went, oh, this is the biggest geopolitical tool of all time. Because what Putin's doing is that what he did with it is he used it to go, look, hey, we have this vaccine. It works. You can distribute it now to everybody. And when the EU and the US and everybody else say, oh, no, we can't have your vaccine. You have to use our vaccine. That's your clue that Sputnik 5 was designed as a tool to blow open the entire COVID vaccine narrative. Okay? That's what it was. And, that's it. I know that there's still a lot of discussion now about, well, people are still dying from from its spike protein and all this other stuff. I'm not going to argue at this point. Putin is not going to be that well informed about the virology. He's going to trust his advisors on this. He's not that's not his gig. You got to remember, you're running a country here. You're going to, at some point, you have to either trust your advisors or you don't trust your advisors. And if you're past bad information and you say, and they give this to you and say, look, this is a great tool. And it was a great tool geopolitically because it actually wound up helping to get the Indians off of the whole COVID train. Yeah. Between that and the words we're not allowed to use.
Yeah.
The therapeutics we're not allowed to use. I think they did a fine job, because once the Indians realized that big pharma in the West were trying to kill off hundreds of millions of Indians, they're like, oh yeah, no, we're with Putin.
Yeah.
Because if Putin was part of this, come on, they wouldn't be buying Russian energy in rupees right now.
I know. I'm just, and I'm not saying that you're wrong, and I'm not just saying that you're right. I'm still saying that I got questions. I don't know. I mean, Sputnik V was funded by a Russian oligarch. The whole system. So
sure.
it's just questions that are asked and stuff. Fam, do you have anything else to ask Mr. Luongo? Because I do have one question that I think our audience would be interested in, because he so eloquently put it on that.
Yeah, make it a quick one.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can you just really briefly, Tom, explain the racist element of the Great Reset that you kind of had talked about on the panel and where it's from?
I firmly believe that old European money is some of the most racist people on the planet. Just to put it like blunt, that they look at everybody as the help. They look at the Chinese as a kind of insectoid race. They've always looked at the Russians as dirty Slavs, and they look at everybody else as just kind of the help, and that they feel entitled to tell everybody how the world needs to be run. And I honestly, and they look at us Americans as the dirty Yanks who stole their colonies. It's very obvious to me that that's what's going on. And so you can see this. This is why my theory of Davos seems to work so well, because you can just see these people manipulating everybody into bad outcomes. War in Ukraine with American money, and then forcing the Chinese to get paranoid about about us taking Taiwan, and we got all of this stuff. And all you're doing is you're seeing these people want to roll up all of Western capital back into Europe, where it has gotten away from them. That the Americans have gotten too rich, the Chinese have gotten too rich. We've never been able to subjugate the Russians, and we want our colonies back, and we want the control of the world to come back to us. And that's what the Great Reset is all about. And if you really push all of these arguments, and you really push all of the not the arguments, but the events, and you start thinking in terms of the White House works for Davos, but the Federal Reserve may not. If you start really looking at, well, where are the breakpoints in this? Because this all goes right back to Trump and their opposition to Trump, their opposition to Brexit, their opposition to Viktor Orban in Hungary, their opposition to Matteo Salvini in Italy, their opposition to Marine Le Pen. It's all the same thing over and over and over again. And this whole Great Reset is that Europe is the basket case. It is the economic basket case of the world. It is the most indebted. It is stuck at negative interest rates. It's destroyed the euro as a potential replacement for the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And now the only thing they have left is a digital euro and massive debt default, which was exactly, by the way, the same friggin' playbook they used to foment World War II. World War II started with a European sovereign debt default. Nothing new here. They pushed everything too far, and then they're trying to get everybody else to fight the war for them. And got news for you. This time, I don't know that that's how it's going to play out for them. So, yeah, no, I think I just look at them like, really? Like, you can't see the inherent racism in Klaus Schwab's books and his attitude towards the rest of the world. You can't see it in the rantings of Guy Verhofstadt or Jean-Claude Juncker or any of these people. You can't see it. Tony Blair. Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Amber King asked, question for Tom real quick,
Sure.
Just really briefly. How do you see Ilhan Omar's strange flex in India and Pakistan on the world stage? Very troubling. I saw a picture of Imran Khan and Ilhan Omar the other day. It's like, why do you got to do that, Imran Khan?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't follow that at all. The less said about Ilhan Omar, the better. I just don't follow her on a daily basis. I'm interested to see what's going on, how Khan deals with his current problem, whether he can come back into power or not.
I don't think it's a current problem. I think it's an opportunity for real revolution in Pakistan.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
From the West, this guy is beloved, yes. And he went and seen Putin. He was the first world leader to go see Putin, and he defied the West by doing so. Yep. So, yeah, I mean, I'm very interested in Pakistan.
The thing I find really interesting is Modi, Narendra Modi in India.
Yeah.
The 180 that Modi has done in the last 9 months has been, I haven't seen anything like it in geopolitical history.
Pakistan, are you talking about?
No, I'm talking about him turning around and allowing Bill Gates to be tried for murder, and the complete 180 on getting close to the United States, breaking defense contracts, opening up talks with
the WEF.
Yeah,
right?
the whole thing, because he was all in on banning, the notes above the $20 the $20 bill, size of roughly a $20 bill. He was all for the cashless society and doing all of this stuff. And then something happened. And I'm telling you, what happened was when all of those, when in Upper Pradesh, and the response to the doctors in Upper Pradesh saved all those people, he went, oh my God. They were literally trying to kill hundreds of millions of my people.
Yeah.
And that changed him completely.
Yeah. Tom,
I've been impressed.
Tom, thank you so much for coming on and having this discussion.
We got him Friday, fam. We got him Friday on the morning show, so you ain't out of the ditch yet with us.
Steve will have fun with him.
He's just licking his chops. He's in the corner. He's waiting.
Yeah.
We'll get you on Friday, Tom. You're not getting away so quickly.
No problem. I'll be happy to do it again. I have no problem getting pushback. We haven't even gotten into the Federal Reserve yet. What I think is going on.
We haven't gotten into the whole
that one.
Aspect.
You have no idea how much pushback I get from people about my theories about what's going on with the Federal Reserve and the New York banks. You have no idea. And I've been right. I've been right all the way down the line with it for the last 9 months. So
we'll tell everybody where that one for next time.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, you can find me over my blog at tomluongo.me. You can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/Gold Goats and Guns, where we publish a monthly investment newsletter, trying to tie all of this stuff up into a coherent portfolio strategy. I've got a podcast. All that stuff's findable at the blog. And obviously, I've got my Twitter feed up, which is the big one. So use that as well until I get thrown off of Twitter, which I've tried mightily to do. And I somehow haven't been. So
if you act the way you did today, when you didn't say the I word when you were talking about India, that's why you're not going to get thrown out. Just say the I word, they'll start to throw you out.
I have used it, and I still haven't gotten. I mean, I've done everything I can to try and get thrown off of Twitter, and it hasn't worked.
You'll get it soon. Thank you so much for joining us today, brother. We really do appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Appreciate the time. I appreciate it. Have a good day now.
See you on Friday.